Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're really sharpening our focus, exploring how to think more effectively, how to cultivate a truly insightful mind.
And we're taking our cues from, well, the master himself, Sherlock Holmes.
Right. Our analysis, it's drawn from excerpts of the book Mastermind, How to Think Like Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah, it's a great blend, actually. Cognitive science meets detective methods. Gives you some practical ways to, improve how you think.
So our mission for this deep dive is pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
Unpack the key ideas, the techniques from this source. Think of it as maybe a guide to seeing the world with a sharper eye.
Noticing things others miss.
Exactly.
And look, to show just how powerful this kind of thinking can be, let's start with a story. A true one, actually, involving Arthur Conan Doyle.
Ah, the creator of Holmes.
The very same. It's about the Great Wirely animal mutilations back in 1903 in England. A really bizarre case.
Yeah, I remember reading about this genuinely disturbing stuff for farm animals found with these precise cuts. Horrible.
Terrorized the whole area. And the police, well, led by a Captain George Anson, they pretty quickly focused on one person, George Adalji.
He was the local vicar's son, quiet guy, half Indian.
That's him. And in 1903, despite honestly very little hard evidence, the police were convinced. He got convicted based on, anonymous letters and just police certainty.
Even though the attacks continued after he was arrested.
Yeah.
And his dad said he was asleep.
Exactly. Contradictions didn't seem to matter much then. He got 7 years. Pretty harsh.
But there was an outcry, wasn't there? People petitioned.
Huge petitions, yeah. The evidence was just too shaky. So he was released after 3 years.
Ah, okay. So justice served.
Well, here's the thing. He was freed, but the conviction itself wasn't overturned. Officially, he was still guilty.
Oh, wow. So he couldn't go back to being a solicitor.
Nope. Career ruined. And this whole injustice caught Arthur Conan Doyle's eye around 1906.
Okay, so Conan Doyle gets involved.
He meets Adalji. And during that meeting, Conan Doyle notices something crucial.
Hmm?
He just watched Adalji read a newspaper. And Adalji held it super close to his face and kind of sideways.
Really close.
Yeah. Conan Doyle immediately saw it for what it was. Severe myopia and astigmatism. Basically, terrible eyesight.
Ah, so the idea of him prowling around fields at night.
Exactly. Conan Doyle said it was ludicrous. He wrote later, "In a single physical defect lay the moral certainty of his innocence."
Wow. Just that one sharp observation cut through all the assumptions.
That's the power of it. And it perfectly sets up what we're digging into today, doesn't it? Looking closely, knowing what to look for.
It really does.
Yeah.
And it leads right into Holmes's own famous analogy about the mind. The brain attic.
Yes, the brain attic. Holmes tells Watson, your mind's like an empty attic. You furnish it. And
Yeah.
you should be really selective about what you put in there.
Didn't he say he'd forget that the Earth goes around the sun because it wasn't relevant to his work?
He claimed he would, yeah. To keep space free for useful stuff. And the book argues this analogy is, well, absolutely central if you want to think like Holmes. It's all about actively curating what you store mentally.
Okay, so how does that attic idea connect with, actual memory?
It lines up pretty well, actually. Information comes in, hits the hippocampus. First, think of that as the attic's entryway.
Right.
Then, based on what your mind flags as important, maybe you focus on it or just grabs you, it gets consolidated, moved into long-term storage in the cortex. That's the main attic space.
But the book stresses memory isn't fixed, right? It's not like a perfect filing cabinet.
Not at all. It's dynamic. Things shift, change, get reconstructed when you recall them. It's not like pulling up an exact digital file.
So retrieving a memory is more like rebuilding it each time.
Kind of, yeah. And things you access often stay near the front, easy to grab. Stuff you ignore just gets dusty in the corners.
But the key takeaway is we can influence this. We can be more selective.
Exactly. We can definitely be more selective about what we let in going forward. And maybe more importantly, we can learn to organize what's already there, make it easier to find the right stuff when we need it.
Aiming for an attic that's more Holmes-less. Cluttered Watson.
That's the goal.
Okay, so we stock the attic selectively. But then how do we process what's coming in? Back to Adalji? Conan Doyle didn't just see him read, he perceived the meaning of how he read.
Precisely. And the source digs into how perception works, especially with people, though it applies more broadly. It breaks it down. Categorize, characterize, and adjust.
Can you give an example?
Sure.
Yeah.
Think about when Watson first meets John Hector McFarlane in one of the stories. First, Watson categorizes him solicitor, Freemason, looks respectable.
Okay.
Then he characterizes him based on appearance, seems frightened, maybe gentle, trustworthy looking.
Right, like judging a book by its cover, or an apple by its shine.
Exactly like the apple analogy. Is it healthy just because it looks good? But the real problem, the book points out, is we often just stop there. We skip the adjust phase.
We don't question that first impression.
Often, no. We lock onto that initial category and characterization. Especially if our minds are busy or stressed. Research actually shows people stick with first judgments even when they get info later that contradicts it.
That sounds problematic.
It can be. And our perception gets nudged around by all sorts of cognitive biases, these mental shortcuts.
Like what?
Well, there's priming. Just being exposed to something subtly, a word, an image, something in the environment can influence how you react to the next thing. It activates associations without you even realizing.
Okay.
Which leads into the representativeness heuristic. We judge how likely something is based on how well it matches our mental prototype, our schema.
So if someone looks like our idea of a criminal, we're more likely to suspect them.
Basically, yes. And we feel more confident in that judgment even if it's based on a stereotype. Then there's omission neglect.
Omission neglect. What's that?
It's our tendency to overlook what's missing. We focus on what's there, but often fail to ask what isn't here that should be.
Like the famous dog that didn't bark in the nighttime.
Exactly. Classic Holmes. The dog not barking wasn't just nothing. It was crucial information. It meant the intruder was someone the dog knew. A telling non-choice.
That idea of non-choices or choices, too, is really interesting.
It is. The book connects it to the default effect. We tend to stick with the default option retirement plans, organ donation registration, because it's easier than making an active choice. Passivity, which is totally opposite to Holmes.
And there's a white coat effect.
Yeah, just being in a doctor's office, being observed, can literally change your physiology, your blood pressure, your context shapes you.
Okay, so with all these biases and effects pushing us around, what does it really mean to pay attention like Holmes? Is it just noticing more?
It's much more active than just passive noticing. It's engaging all your senses, consciously questioning what you see and hear, and being aware of how the environment and your own biases might be twisting things.
Our brains do a bit of this automatically, right? Like the cocktail party effect.
Yeah.
You tune out the noise, but snap to attention if someone says your name.
Right. Your brain flags your name as relevant. But Holmesian attention is about training your brain to flag other things as relevant too, things related to your goals, even without that automatic trigger.
So how do you train that?
It takes mindful selectivity, goal-directed attention. The book mentions Peter Gollwitzer's research things like thinking ahead, setting really specific goals, using if-then plans.
If-then, like if I see this, then I will do that.
Exactly. Also, writing things down helps clarify focus. And consciously thinking about the consequences and potential rewards of paying attention to certain things, selectivity is the absolute first step. Training your brain what to focus on.
It sounds like the difference between Watson's brain, which seems more reactive to the immediate surrounding.
The default brain, yeah. Easily distracted, maybe enjoys a nice view.
And Holmes's brain, which has been actively, deliberately rewired.
Right. For Holmes, that same nice view might trigger thoughts about escape routes or surveillance points because his brain is constantly primed for investigation. He's trained his attention for his purpose.
Okay, so we've got the selective brain attic and sharp, trained observation. But isn't Holmes usually seen as just pure logic? A deduction machine?
That's the common image, yeah. But the source material argues pretty strongly that his real power comes from something else too. Imagination and reflective thought.
That quiet step between seeing something and jumping to a conclusion.
Exactly that. The space where you actually process, connect dots, consider possibilities. It's so easy to skip, especially when we're rushed.
The book mentions functional fixedness here, right?
Yes. That's our tendency to only see objects in their usual intended function. It blocks creativity.
Like the candle problem, where you have candles, matches, and a box of tacks.
That's the classic example. Most people see the box only as a container for the tacks. They don't see the box itself as a potential shelf to mount the candle on the wall.
So solving it needs that imaginative leap, seeing the parts differently.
Precisely. Breaking things down, seeing new potential functions. And this kind of imaginative thinking often gets a boost from distance.
Distance? You mean like physical distance?
That can help, sure. But also temporal distance, thinking about the past or future.
Yeah.
Social distance, thinking about others' perspectives. Or hypothetical distance, just asking, what if? Stepping back mentally lets you see the whole puzzle, not just the piece in your hand.
Like Holmes said, changing your point of view can make the damning thing become the clue.
Exactly. Perspective is everything. Think about the Dick Fosbury flop in high jumping.
Oh, yeah, the guy who started jumping backwards?
Right. For ages, everyone went over the bar forwards. That was just
Yeah.
how it was done. Functional fixedness for jumping
Until Fosbury.
until Fosbury. He tried going over backward, looked totally weird, probably seemed ridiculous to people, but guess what? It worked better. Revolutionized the sport. Olympic gold, standard technique now.
Shows how a totally unconventional, imaginative approach can just shatter old limits.
Absolutely, even if it looks odd at first.
What about mind wandering? Isn't that usually bad for focus?
Well, mindless distraction, just letting your thoughts drift aimlessly, yeah, that's usually counterproductive. But the book makes a distinction. There's a kind of mindful distraction or maybe defocused attention that can actually help with insight.
How so?
Sometimes, stepping away from a really tricky problem lets your subconscious work on it, allows less obvious, more remote associations to bubble up. Some studies even suggest people solve insight problems better when they're a bit tired or less inhibited.
Interesting. So being slightly less focused can sometimes open creative doors.
It seems so for certain kinds of problems. Choosing the right kind of disengagement, maybe listening to music, going for a walk in nature, can facilitate that process.
And isn't there something called the Zeigarnik effect?
Yes, waiters remembering unfinished orders better than paid ones, or people recalling tasks they were interrupted during better than ones they completed. It creates this little bit of mental tension, a need for closure that keeps the unfinished problem active in your mind, even subconsciously. So taking a deliberate break isn't just resting, it lets that background processing happen. You come back often feeling refreshed and maybe seeing things differently.
It all sounds like a lot of ongoing work. Does this process of sharpening the mind ever end? Can you just arrive?
The book really emphasizes that learning is lifelong. And the exciting part is our brains stay remarkably plastic. They can physically change and develop new pathways even when we're older.
Like that study about people learning to juggle. Their brain structure actually changed.
Exactly. Compelling proof that the brain can adapt and grow based on experience, even in adulthood.
But there must be pitfalls along the way. Things to watch out for.
Oh, definitely. Complacency and overconfidence are huge ones. As you get better at something, as thinking habits become ingrained or even good ones, you stop noticing the effort involved.
And you start thinking you're better than you are.
Pretty much. You become overconfident. And the weird thing the book points out is that overconfidence often increases with experience and taking action. It doesn't decrease. Studies show it with CEOs, traders, even people predicting coin flips.
Just because you've done it more, you feel more certain, even if the situation is still complex or random.
Exactly. So just being aware of that tendency towards overconfidence is critical. Another vital Holmesian skill is rigorously separating objective fact from, guesswork, assumption, maybe wistful thinking.
Which brings us to the misinformation effect, like those Elizabeth Loftus studies with the car crashes.
Right. Just changing one word, asking witnesses if the car's smashed versus hit actually changed their memories. People remembered seeing broken glass that wasn't there when they heard smashed.
Wow. So subtle language can actually rewrite our memories.
It can definitely influence them and influence the deductions we make based on those potentially flawed memories. And counterintuitively, the book notes that having more information sometimes makes sifting fact from fiction harder, not easier.
More noise to filter through.
Exactly. You need to be systematic, thoughtful about it.
And our brains seem desperate to create a story that makes sense, don't they? Even if the pieces don't quite fit.
Absolutely. That's the conjunction fallacy in action. Remember the Linda example. Is she more likely to be a bank teller or a bank teller and active in the feminist movement?
People usually say bank teller and feminist, right? Because it fits a richer story.
Yeah, even though statistically, a single condition is always more probable than two conditions combined. We go for the more plausible, coherent story, not the higher probability. We confuse the two.
Gazaniga's left brain interpreter concept seems related here too.
Definitely. The idea that part of our brain just creates narratives to explain our actions or perceptions, even if it doesn't have the full picture. It confabulates plausible reasons.
It's just trying to make sense of everything.
Right, and this links straight into confirmation bias. We readily accept information that confirms what we already believe, and we're much more skeptical of stuff that challenges us.
Even Conan Doyle falling for the fairy photos because he wanted to believe.
A classic example. We're great at spotting bias in others, but notoriously bad at seeing it in ourselves.
Okay, so given all these biases and mental traps, what can we actually do? Any practical tools?
Well, the book suggests simple but powerful things, like externalizing your thoughts, writing things down.
How does that help?
It forces you to structure your thinking, makes it concrete. It can reveal patterns or assumptions you weren't aware of, like someone tracking their migraines and suddenly seeing a connection to something they ate.
Makes sense. What else?
Checklists. Sounds basic, but even for experts, simple checklists for routine procedures, like in surgery or aviation, drastically reduce errors. They prevent you from overlooking the obvious but crucial steps.
So it's about not being too proud for simple tools, like Holmes using a shiny coffee pot to see behind him instead of some elaborate deduction.
Exactly. Use the simplest tool that works. And it all ties back to that idea of active engagement over passive complacency. Remember the non-choices being choices. Holmes is all about deliberate action.
There's also that distinction the book makes between different types of memory, declarative and procedural.
Right. Declarative is your explicit factual knowledge, like consciously remembering the steps to start driving when you're learning. Procedural is the implicit skill, the habit, like how you drive years later, totally automatically, without thinking about the steps.
So expertise is moving from declarative steps to implicit procedural skill.
Largely, yes. Holmes's methods likely started as conscious steps, but through practice became deep, intuitive expertise.
And what about Watson's role? The book calls him a whetstone, or a habit for Holmes.
It's a fascinating idea, isn't it, that Watson's very presence, maybe his methodical slowness, actually helps Holmes think. It forces Holmes to articulate his thoughts, maybe stimulates his intuition somehow.
So even interactions or maybe specific routines can be thinking tools.
Seems so. And Holmes himself knew he needed to keep learning. He actively sought out difficult, unusual cases. Education, Grigson, education, he'd say, always pushing himself to avoid getting stale.
Okay, so if we pull all these threads together, the curated addict, the sharp observation, the imagination, the constant learning, avoiding bias, using tools, the book wraps this up in a metaphor, right? The hunter mindset.
Exactly. That image of Holmes, like a dashing foxhound drawing a cover. Always alert, focused energy, ready to spring into action, but conserving energy until it's needed. Purposeful observation, not just passive waiting.
And a hunter has to be adaptable, don't they?
Absolutely. Ready to change tactics if the situation changes unexpectedly. Like in The Adventure of the Abbey Grange, Holmes makes a decision about a suspect that goes against the grain because the specific facts demanded it. No rigid formula.
This hunter mindset also values quiet.
Yes. Watson often notes Holmes needing seclusion for deep concentration, to weigh evidence, build theories. In our noisy world, actively seeking or creating that quiet mental space to filter distractions is crucial. It takes deliberate effort.
And finally, constant vigilance, never letting your guard down.
Right. The book warns that routine and success breed complacency. And nothing kills vigilance like the commonplace. Holmes always said the least remarkable crimes are often the hardest. Why? Because they lull you into not looking closely enough.
That active vigilance is the antidote to the biases and overconfidence we talked about.
It really is.
So we've taken quite a journey here. Through the brain attic, observation, imagination, lifelong learning, bias fighting, and landing on this hunter mindset inspired by Holmes.
And the key thing is, these aren't just tricks for fictional detectives. They offer a really powerful framework for you to enhance your own thinking, your observation, your decision-making, whatever you do.
Absolutely. And maybe here's a final thought to leave you with, something that really struck me from the source material. Just think about the incredible potential of your own brain. Its ability to change, to grow, to develop these complex ways of thinking, even later in life.
That plasticity we mentioned, the book touches on the growth mindset idea, believing that your intelligence isn't fixed, that you can develop your abilities.
And research actually backs this up, right? Just believing you can improve makes your brain respond better when you make mistakes. It helps you learn from them more effectively.
It does seem to foster better neural and behavioral responses, yeah. More engagement in learning from errors.
So that mind attic, it's not some fixed size room. It's something you're constantly building, renovating, organizing. So the challenge for you listening is maybe to consider, how does your belief about your own ability to grow impact your willingness to put in that Holmesian effort? How could cultivating this mindful, adaptable hunter mindset change things for you?
The potential is there. It just requires that ongoing purposeful engagement, that vigilance in your own thinking.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.